The alarm on Maya Chen's cracked phone screen blinked 4:47 a.m., and she was already awake. She had been awake since 3:30, lying on the thin mattress she shared with her 3-year-old daughter, Lily, listening to the sound of the little girl's breathing, that soft, trusting rhythm that was the most beautiful sound in Maya's entire world. In those quiet hours before sunrise, when the apartment felt like the only place left on earth, Maya would watch Lily sleep and make herself a silent promise. Today will be better. Today I will figure it out. She had been making that promise for 11 months. Maya was 28 years old, and she had learned that life does not warn you before it takes everything. 18 months ago, she had been a nursing student with 2 semesters left, a husband named David who coached youth soccer on weekends, and a small apartment in Phoenix that smelled like coffee and clean laundry. Then David's car had been struck by a drunk driver on a Tuesday evening in November. He survived, barely, but the medical bills didn't care about barely. They cared about numbers. And the numbers were catastrophic. She had dropped out of school to work. She had sold everything worth selling. She had moved from Phoenix to Chicago when her cousin offered a couch and the promise of better job opportunities. The couch had lasted 3 weeks before her cousin's landlord discovered the arrangement and threatened eviction. Now Maya rented a studio apartment the size of a large closet on the north side of the city, paying $780 a month that she did not comfortably have, and she cleaned other people's homes 6 days a week. She was good at it. She was efficient and thorough, and she never complained. The agency she worked for, Premier Home Services, had given her a 5-star rating based on client feedback. She made $13 an hour, and on good weeks without a doctor's copay for Lily's ear infections, weeks without a bus pass to replace, she could almost breathe. Lily stirred beside her, a small fist uncurling against the pillow. She had David's nose and Maya's stubborn eyes, and she had recently discovered that the word "why" was the most powerful word in any language. She asked it approximately 400 times a day. Why is the sky blue, Mommy? Why do worms come out when it rains? Why can't we have a dog? Why are you crying? Maya always answered the first 3. For the last one, she had perfected a smile that reached just far enough to be convincing. She got up quietly, tiptoed to the narrow kitchen, and made oatmeal with brown sugar because Lily liked the way it smelled when it was still steaming. She packed the little girl's bag for Mrs. Patterson's house. Lily spent the days with a retired neighbor who charged Maya $40 a week, which was the only reason Maya's entire life hadn't collapsed completely. She laid out Lily's clothes, the lavender shirt with the small butterfly on the collar, the gray leggings with the elastic that was starting to go loose on one side. Then she ironed her own uniform, black pants, white blouse, and twisted her dark hair into a neat bun, and she looked at herself in the small mirror above the bathroom sink for exactly 3 seconds before she made herself stop. "You are okay," she told her reflection. "You're okay. Keep going." The assignment for that Thursday morning was new. Premier Home Services had sent a notification at 9 p.m. the night before, a standing weekly booking at a residential address on North Lakeshore Drive. Maya had looked up the address out of habit and had blinked at her phone screen in the dark. North Lakeshore Drive. The kind of address that had a name before the street number. The kind of address that appeared in Chicago Magazine alongside words like architectural masterpiece and breathtaking skyline views. She had gone to sleep telling herself it was just a house. A big house, but a house. People lived in it. It got dusty like everything else. She woke up still telling herself that. She dropped Lily at Mrs. Patterson's door at 6:15. Lily went without protest because Mrs. Patterson kept a jar of animal crackers on the kitchen table and a tabby cat named Henry who tolerated being carried like a baby. At the door, Lily turned back and grabbed Maya's hand with both of hers. That grip that was so fierce and small and total that it made Maya's chest feel like it might crack open every single time. "Mommy come back?" she asked. She asked it every morning. She had asked it every morning since David's accident, since the moves, since the upheaval that even a 3-year-old body could sense like weather changing. "Mommy always comes back," Maya said. She knelt down and pressed her lips to Lily's forehead and held them there for a long moment. Always. No matter what. She rode the bus north for 40 minutes, watching the city change outside the window. The modest storefronts giving way to wider streets, the wider streets giving way to gleaming glass towers, the towers stepping back for the broad, gray shimmer of Lake Michigan. The world outside the window looked like a different planet from the one Maya lived in, and yet here she was, traveling between them with a tote bag of cleaning supplies and a thermos of gas station coffee. The building on Lakeshore Drive had a doorman in a charcoal uniform who checked her ID against a list and called up before letting her through. The elevator was marble and mirrored and whisper quiet. It rose to the 41st floor with such smooth silence that Maya only knew she was moving because of the pressure change in her ears. The door to the penthouse was already unlocked. The agency had arranged access. Maya let herself in and she stopped. The apartment was not a house. It was, she searched for the word and couldn't find one in English. So her mind supplied the Mandarin her grandmother used to use for things that were almost too much. Jingdong. Astonishing. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 3 sides, the lake spread out below like hammered silver, the skyline curving away to the south in a slow glittering arc. The furniture was spare and costly and arranged with the confidence of someone who had never needed to worry about whether things matched. The kitchen was larger than Maya's entire apartment. There were walls of bookshelves, and the books looked red. She stood there for 30 seconds longer than she should have, just looking. Then she put on her gloves, tied her hair back a little more firmly, and got to work. She had cleaned for 2 hours, had moved through the kitchen and the guest bathrooms, and was working on the main living space with her back to the hallway when she heard the front door open behind her. She turned, dust cloth in hand. He was not what she expected, though she wasn't sure what she had expected. He was tall, with dark hair that looked like it had been pushed back by hand rather than combed, wearing a gray t-shirt and running shoes. He was young, younger than she'd imagined for someone who lived here, and he looked tired in the specific, complicated way of someone who had too much to do rather than too little. He saw her and stopped. "Oh," he said. "I forgot you were coming today." "I can come back," Maya said immediately, taking a step toward her bag. "No," he said and shook his head. "Stay. Please." "I'm sorry. I went for a run. I'll be out of your way." He walked toward the kitchen, and Maya turned back to her work, and that was how she met Ethan Cole, in passing, in silence, in a room full of someone else's light. She had no idea that this morning was the last ordinary morning of her life. Ethan Cole had been on the cover of Forbes at 31, and he had hated the photograph. Not because he was vain, he wasn't particularly, but because the photographer had asked him to cross his arms and look directly into the camera, and the result was an image of a man who appeared to own the world and know it. Ethan had bought 12 copies of the magazine, stacked them in his recycling bin, and never mentioned it to anyone. He was 33 now, and the company he had built from a converted Chicago warehouse, a healthcare technology firm called ClearPath, had revolutionized patient data management for community hospitals across 12 states. Which was to say, it had saved lives in the quiet, unglamorous, bureaucratic way that most lives were saved, through better information and faster decisions and fewer catastrophic errors. He was proud of it. He was not proud in the way the Forbes photograph suggested, but in a deeper, more private way, the way you are proud of something that cost you something real. What it had cost him was most of everything else. He had not been on a vacation in 4 years. He had not had a relationship that lasted longer than 6 months in 3 years. He had not slept 8 consecutive hours in. He genuinely could not remember. His penthouse on Lakeshore Drive was beautiful and silent and aggressively organized, and it had been designed by an interior decorator he had met twice and communicated with primarily through his assistant. He lived in it the way a traveler lives in a hotel, functionally, temporarily, without leaving much trace of himself. His mother called from Sacramento every Sunday and asked if he was eating, and he said yes, and sometimes it was even true. He had come home from his morning run to find the housekeeper already there, and he had felt the same low-level guilt he always felt when he'd forgotten about a scheduled service, the sense that he had been caught being disorganized, which was a feeling he disliked. He'd apologized and retreated to his home office, meaning to shower and then get on a 9 a.m. call with his COO about their Memphis expansion. But he found himself pausing in the hallway instead. He could hear her working. The soft, specific sounds of someone cleaning with real attention, the spray of something on a surface, the careful movement of objects, the way a good cleaner develops a rhythm that is almost musical in its consistency. He had grown up with his mother cleaning other people's houses. She had done it for 7 years after his father left, working 6 days a week and coming home with her hands red and her eyes tired and her voice still warm when she asked Ethan about his day. He knew what that work cost. He went to the kitchen to make coffee and she was in the living room, and he told himself he was not watching her through the doorway, but he was a little. She moved with the economy of someone for whom time was not a luxury. No wasted motions, no pauses, just steady, competent progression through the space. She was young. He hadn't expected that. Young and serious-faced and clearly very far from idle. He made his coffee and went to his office and got on his call. He thought about her twice during the meeting. He wasn't sure why. The second time she came, the following Thursday, he was in the kitchen when she arrived and he said good morning, and she said good morning, and he asked if she wanted coffee and she looked briefly startled, as though the offer were in a language she didn't quite speak, and then she said, "No, thank you. I'm fine." "I have a good espresso machine," he said, which was a strange thing to say, and he wasn't sure why he said it. "I believe you," she said, and there was the faintest flicker at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but related to one, before she turned back to her bag. He found himself looking forward to Thursdays in a way he didn't examine too closely. He learned her name from the agency paperwork on his third Thursday home, Maya Chin. He learned it, and he thought it suited her somehow, though he couldn't have explained what he meant by that. He started making sure he was home in the mornings on Thursdays. He told himself this was coincidence. It was not coincidence. What he noticed over those weeks was that she was careful. Not just in her work, careful in the way she held herself, careful in what she said and didn't say, careful in how much space she took up. She thanked him when he moved out of her way. She apologized when she had to ask him to lift something. She was relentlessly, almost heartbreakingly polite, in the specific way of someone who has learned that taking up too much room leads to consequences. He noticed the phone. It was cracked across the upper left corner of the screen, the kind of crack that spreads if you don't replace the glass, and every time she checked a message or looked at the time, she turned it at an angle to see around the damage. He noticed she never took the coffee he offered. He noticed that she ate her lunch, a sandwich brought from home in a small Ziploc bag, at the kitchen counter standing up, as if sitting down would take too long. He noticed all of this and said nothing because what do you say? "I see you. I see how hard this is." You don't say that. You don't say that to someone you barely know, someone who comes to your home to clean it and leaves no trace of themselves behind except cleaner surfaces and straighter lines. You don't say it because it crosses a boundary, because it would embarrass her, because the power imbalance in the room is already complicated enough. So he said nothing. And she said very little. And Thursdays came and went. And then one Thursday, the 7th one, The one Ethan would later mark in his memory as the precise moment everything changed. She arrived at his door, and something was wrong. He could see it immediately. The careful composure was still there, but underneath it something had cracked, the way her phone screen had cracked, a fracture running through her that she was holding together by sheer will. Her eyes were too bright. Her jaw was set too firmly. She had clearly been crying not very long ago and had done everything in her power to erase the evidence. He stepped back from the door. "Maya," he said. "What happened?" She shook her head, a quick, precise shake. "I'm fine."
"I'm sorry."
"Let me just—" "You don't have to work today." "I need to work," she said. And the way she said it, quietly, with a specificity that told him it wasn't preference but necessity, stopped him completely. "Okay," he said. "Okay. But will you tell me what's wrong?" She was silent for a long moment, standing in his doorway with her tote bag over her shoulder and her chin lifted, and her eyes doing everything they could to stay dry. Then, in a voice so controlled it almost didn't sound like a voice at all, she said, "Lily got sick. My daughter. And I don't. I'm working on it." "How old is she?" 3. He opened the door wider.
"Come in," he said. "Please."
"Tell me what's happening." And because she was so tired, so comprehensively, bone-deep tired, she did. Lily had started coughing on Monday. Maya explained this to Ethan sitting at his kitchen counter. She had not meant to sit, but he had guided her gently to a stool with a gesture so unassuming that she'd sat before she decided to, while he made her coffee without asking again, just placed it in front of her and stepped back, giving her the room to either accept it or not. She accepted it. She wrapped both hands around the mug. The cough, she told him, had started small. The kind of cough that every mother knows, wet and thick and too low in the chest to dismiss. Maya had kept Lily home from Mrs. Patterson's on Monday and Tuesday and had lost 2 days of pay she could not lose. She'd taken Lily to the urgent care clinic on Tuesday afternoon and spent 3 hours waiting on plastic chairs, Lily feverish and limp in her arms, before being seen for 6 minutes by a physician's assistant who said it was probably viral and to come back if she got worse. She got worse. By Wednesday night, Lily's temperature was 103.2, and she was wheezing in a way that made Maya's nursing school training surface in her brain with cold clarity, that specific wheeze, that pattern. And she had taken Lily to the emergency room at 11 p.m. and sat in the waiting area for 4 hours, and then sat in a curtained bay for 3 more while the noise of the ER moved around them, and Lily slept fitfully in the narrow hospital bed, and Maya held her hand and did not let herself think too far ahead. Pneumonia. Left lower lobe. They wanted to admit her. The insurance situation was complicated. Maya was on a marketplace plan, the cheapest tier she could find, with a deductible she had never been close to meeting because every time she had the money set aside, something else had taken it. The admissions coordinator had spoken to her in the careful voice of someone delivering information they know will cause pain. Yes, treatment would proceed regardless, but there was paperwork, and there were financial discussions to have, and the deductible was $4,000 before insurance would cover anything meaningful. $4,000. Maya had held Lily's hand and looked at the fluorescent light above the hospital bed and thought, what do I sell? What do I have left to sell? The answer she arrived at was nothing. She had sent a message to the agency at 5 a.m. explaining she might be late. By 6 a.m., Lily's fever had broken temporarily, and the attending physician said she was stable enough to manage outpatient with a specific antibiotic regimen and a pulse oximeter to monitor her oxygen levels at home, but that they needed to fill the prescriptions today specifically, and monitor very closely. Maya had signed the discharge paperwork with hands that had not entirely stopped trembling. The prescriptions were $214. The pulse oximeter was another $80. She had paid it. She had paid it on her credit card, the one with a high interest rate, the one she was trying to pay down, the one that was now carrying a balance that made her feel sick to look at. And she had brought Lily to Mrs. Patterson's because Mrs. Patterson had said she could manage with a sick child for the day. God bless that woman. And Maya had gotten on the bus to North Lakeshore Drive and talked to herself quietly for 40 minutes, telling herself she was fine. She was handling it. She was okay. She was not okay. She told Ethan all of this, not in a rush, not dramatically, but in the measured, matter-of-fact way that people describe disasters when they have been living inside of them long enough that the disaster has become the weather. She told him about the deductible and the prescriptions and the 2 lost days of work and the credit card balance, and she told him about Lily's cough and Lily's fever and the specific wheeze that had frightened her more than anything in a long time. And then she stopped and looked at the coffee in her hands and said, quietly, "I'm sorry. You didn't ask for any of that." "I did, actually," Ethan said. "I specifically asked. It's too much to put on someone." "It's not," he said. "Maya." He waited until she looked up. "It's not too much." She looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, which she had been carefully not doing, because it was easier to treat this as a professional arrangement if she kept her eyes on neutral surfaces. He was watching her with an expression that was not pity. She had learned to recognize pity, and this wasn't it. It was something more deliberate than pity, more specific. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded carefully. "When Lily was in the emergency room last night, was there a moment, any moment, when someone stopped and just made sure you were okay?" The question landed somewhere she wasn't prepared for. She felt her throat tighten with a swiftness that surprised her. Because the answer was no. Not a nurse, not a social worker, not the admissions coordinator with her careful voice. Everyone had looked at Lily, which was correct, which was as it should be. Lily was the patient, but nobody had turned to Maya and said, "You are carrying something very heavy. Let someone help you carry it."
"No," she said.
Her voice was steady. Barely, but steady. "Okay," Ethan said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to help. I want to help with the deductible and the prescriptions and whatever else there is. And I want to say that clearly before you say no, because I think your first instinct is going to be to say no." Her first instinct was to say no. He was exactly right. "This is your job," she started. "This has nothing to do with my job. This is..." He paused, and she watched him choose his next words with the care of someone who understood that precision mattered here. "There is a little girl who is sick and a mother who has been up all night, and nobody should have to navigate all of that alone. That's it. That's the whole reason." Maya looked at him. She looked at him for a long time. She had spent 11 months keeping the walls up because she had learned, first slowly, and then all at once, that accepting help meant owing something, meant vulnerability, meant one more thing that could be taken away. She had held Lily's hand in that hospital bay and listened to the fluorescent light hum and made herself into something nearly impenetrable because that was what survival had required. But she was so tired. She was so profoundly, achingly tired. "She asked me this morning," Maya said. Her voice cracked, just slightly for the first time.
"Lily."
"When I dropped her off," she said. She stopped, pressed her lips together, started again. She said, "Mommy, nobody would help us." Because I'd been on hold with the insurance company while she was in the room, and she'd heard me, and she's 3, so she doesn't fully understand, but she understood that. And she stopped again, pressed one hand flat against the counter. "I didn't know what to tell her," she said. "I didn't know what to say." Ethan was very still. He let the silence settle because he understood from some deep, learned place that this was a moment that needed to be held, not rushed. That she had given him something very fragile in those words, and it required care. Then he said, "Tell her somebody helped." He made the first call at 10:47 a.m. Maya was in the living room, working because she had insisted, had said, with a quiet firmness that he had quickly learned not to argue with, that she was going to do her job while he did whatever he was going to do, and that was the only arrangement she was comfortable with. So she cleaned and he sat at his kitchen table with his phone and he started calling. First he called Dr. Renata Ose, a pulmonologist he'd met at a gala 3 years ago who had talked for 20 minutes about the criminally inadequate respiratory care infrastructure in underserved Chicago communities. She picked up on the second ring, and Ethan explained the situation. Child 3 years old, left lower lobe pneumonia, discharged to outpatient care, pulse oximeter monitoring, specific antibiotic, and he asked who is the best pediatric pulmonologist in the city for follow-up. James Whitfield at Lurie, she said, without hesitation. I'll call ahead. He called his attorney next, not for legal reasons, but because Sandra Chun, who had been his personal counsel for 6 years and also happened to know everyone, had once helped him navigate a philanthropic grant process that required cutting through approximately 9 layers of institutional inertia. He explained what he needed: someone who could help with the insurance situation, someone who understood how to get a deductible properly evaluated, possibly restructured. Is this a clear path thing? Sandra asked.
No.
This is a personal thing. A brief pause. I see, she said, in a tone he chose not to examine. I know someone at the Illinois Department of Insurance. Let me make a call. Then he opened his laptop and transferred funds to cover the emergency room deductible, the prescriptions already filled, and 3 months of prescription coverage for follow-up medications. He set up an account with a pharmacy delivery service that would bring Lily's medications directly to Maya's apartment so Maya didn't have to take extra buses. He was not trying to solve everything. He understood, or was beginning to understand, that this was not about writing a check and walking away. Maya's situation was not a single problem with a single solution. It was a web of interlocking pressures that had been building for more than a year, and money, while necessary, was not the only thing missing. What was missing was someone in her corner. He thought about that while he made his 4th call, this one to Premier Home Services, where he spoke to the owner, a pleasant and somewhat startled man named Greg Hartwell, and explained that he would be increasing Maya's rate unilaterally and that if that posed a contractual difficulty, he was happy to simply hire her directly, whichever Greg preferred. Greg preferred the rate increase. Ethan also asked about benefits. Greg said that full-time employees received benefits, but Maya was technically classified as a contractor. Ethan asked whether there was a path to full-time. Greg said he'd have to look into it. Ethan said he would appreciate an answer by Monday. He hung up and sat for a moment looking out at the lake. He was not naive about what he was doing. He was aware that he was a 33-year-old man with more money than he could meaningfully spend in a lifetime, sitting in an apartment that cost more per month than most people made in a year, calling in favors on behalf of a woman he had known for 7 weeks. He was aware that the gap between their circumstances was obscene in a way that had nothing to do with either of them, and everything to do with a world that distributed luck with no discernible logic. He was also aware, and this was the part he was less certain how to hold, that his motivations were not entirely simple. He admired her. He had admired her from the second Thursday, when she had politely but completely refused his offer to help carry the heavy vacuum down the hallway, not because she needed to prove something, but because she had a system, and interrupting it cost time she couldn't afford. He admired the precision of her, the dignity of her, the way she did every single thing in his apartment with a thoroughness that was almost a form of respect for the work, for the space, for some standard she held herself to that had nothing to do with whether anyone was watching. And he was lonely. He was 33 years old, and he had a thriving company and a beautiful apartment and access to virtually everything in the world, and he was comprehensively, quietly lonely in a way that he had gotten very good at not looking at directly. He was not going to do anything about that second part. It wasn't the point, and it wasn't the time, and the power difference between them made it a line he would not approach. But he could be honest with himself about it, alone at his kitchen table while she moved quietly through his living room. He went to the doorway. "I want to tell you what I've done," he said. "So you know. So it's not a surprise." She turned. The dust cloth was in her hand. She watched him with those careful, dark eyes. He told her about the deductible coverage, set up through a direct transfer to the hospital billing department with her as the named patient's parent. He told her about Dr. Whitfield and the appointment Sandra would be calling her to confirm by end of day. He told her about the pharmacy delivery service. He told her about the rate increase. She was very still. "Ethan," she said. "That's." "Please let me finish," he said gently. He told her about the conversation with Greg Hartwell and the question about full-time status. He told her that Sandra would be reaching out about the insurance situation, that there might be options she hadn't been told about. He told her that none of it obligated her to anything, not to gratitude, not to a different kind of relationship with him, not to any version of this that made her uncomfortable. He told her it was all practical and reversible and that if any of it felt wrong, she only had to say so. Then he stopped talking. She was looking at him, and her eyes were wet, and she was not going to cry. He could see her deciding, actively and emphatically, not to cry. But the decision was costing her something. "Why?" she said. He thought about it carefully. He wanted to give her the real answer, not the comfortable one. "Because you're a good person," he said. "And good people shouldn't have to fight this hard just to keep their kid healthy. And because," he paused, "because I can, and not enough people who can do." She looked at him for a long time. "My daughter said nobody would help us," she said. Her voice was very quiet. "I know. She's going to want to know who did." "You can tell her whatever feels right," he said. Maya looked down at the dust cloth in her hand, then back up at him. And she said, with a simplicity that went straight through every carefully constructed wall he had built around his own heart in 3 years of working too hard and feeling too little. "Thank you. Not just for the things. Thank you for the way you did the things." He didn't answer right away, because she had said exactly the right thing, and he needed a moment to let it land. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday that arrived with the tentative warmth of a Chicago spring doing its best, Ethan asked Maya if Lily might like to see the lake. He asked it carefully. He had thought about how to ask it for several days, rehearsing the right way to frame an invitation that would not feel presumptuous, that would not ask for anything, that would leave her the full and easy ability to say no without any awkwardness trailing behind it. He asked it by text, actually a short, deliberate text that said, "I know a spot on the lakefront that's good for 3-year-olds. No agenda. Just thought it might be a good day for it. Completely up to you." She had not responded for 4 hours, which had been its own kind of suspense. Then, "She's been asking about the lake since I told her I could see it from your building." "What time?" They met at 2 p.m. near the Olive Park promontory, where the water came closest to the path and the city stepped back a little, giving the lake room. Ethan arrived first and stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, watching the water, trying not to think about what to say. Then he heard them. He heard Lily before he saw her, a specific, high, excited sound that was halfway between a word and a pure expression of feeling, the kind of sound that children make when something is so beautiful it overwhelms the vocabulary they have. He turned, and there they were. Maya with her dark hair loose for the first time, no bun, no uniform, just jeans and a green jacket, and Lily, small and serious and absolutely magnificent, in a yellow coat with wooden toggle buttons, walking with a deliberate, full-body investment of a child who has recently mastered walking fast. Lily saw the water and stopped. She stood completely still for 3 full seconds, which for a 3-year-old is geologically significant. The lake stretched out before her, gray-blue and enormous and restless, nothing like anything she had seen before. Then she turned to Maya with an expression of total, overwhelmed wonder. "Mommy," she said, "it's so big." "It is," Maya said. Lily turned to look at it again. Then she looked up and noticed Ethan for the first time, because she had been so consumed by the lake that a reasonable adult human presence had not registered as worth attending to. She studied him with the unguarded directness that only very small children and very confident adults manage. "Are you the one who helped?" she asked. Ethan glanced at Maya, who was doing something with her expression that he couldn't entirely read. "I tried to," he said. Lily considered this. She was 3, and 3 was a serious and philosophical age. Then she reached out and took his hand, both hands, the way she did with her mother, and she looked up at him and said, with enormous solemnity, "Thank you for helping my mommy." The lake moved behind her. The wind came off the water cool and fresh. Ethan felt something shift inside him, not crack, not break, but shift, like a window being opened in a room that had been closed a very long time. "It was easy," he said. "She just needed someone to start." They walked the path for 2 hours. Lily found 3 interesting rocks, which she carried with intense personal investment, interrogating Ethan about each one. "Why is this one bumpy? Why does water make rocks smooth? Why don't fish have legs?" He answered every question. He was surprised to find he enjoyed it, the relentlessness of it, the way she took every answer and immediately built another question on top of it, like a child constructing something without a plan, just upward and upward and upward. Maya walked beside him, and they talked, really talked for the first time about things that weren't the immediate emergency. She talked about nursing school and what she had left behind, and she talked about David, carefully, factually, and about Phoenix and the accident and the specific sequence of events that had led to a girl from Sacramento. She was from Sacramento, like his mother, he noted. He didn't say so, ending up cleaning penthouses in Chicago with a 3-year-old and a cracked phone screen. He talked about his company and what it had cost him, and he talked about his own mother. Her red hands, her tired eyes, her voice still warm. And he watched Maya's face change when he said it, watched her understand something about him that she hadn't understood before. "You grew up watching someone do what I do," she said. "Yes. That's why you." "Part of why," he said honestly. She was quiet for a moment. Lily had run ahead to the water's edge, where a park fence kept her safely back from the drop, and she was flinging her arms at the lake as though trying to embrace it. "What's the other part?" Maya asked. He looked at the water, then at her. "I think you already know," he said. She was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, not the careful, guarded quiet of the past weeks, but something softer. Something that meant the walls were not exactly down, but the doors were open, just slightly, letting light come through in both directions. Lily ran back to them then, yellow coat flying, toggle buttons swinging, holding up a 4th rock that was essentially indistinguishable from the previous 3, but was clearly, in her assessment, superior. "This one is special," she announced. "It absolutely is." Ethan agreed, and took it from her with appropriate ceremony, and she beamed at him with her mother's eyes and her father's nose and the full, undefended, world-expanding brightness of a child who has not yet learned to protect herself from joy. He gave the rock back. She tucked it in her pocket with the others. They walked back as the light went golden over the water, and Lily held both their hands, one each, and swung between them on the path, counting her swings in the earnest, slightly inaccurate way of someone who is still negotiating with numbers.
1, 2, 4, 2.
1. Maya laughed. It was the first time Ethan had heard her laugh, really laugh, unguarded and genuine and bright. He looked at her and she looked at him, and Lily swung between them, counting wrong numbers over the gold-lit lake, and something began. The letter from Premier Home Services arrived on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after the lakefront walk. Maya read it standing at her kitchen counter, Lily asleep in the next room, the apartment quiet except for the building's radiator doing its particular clanking argument with the pipes. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the small step stool she kept by the counter because there was no room for a proper kitchen chair, and she let herself feel it for a moment before she decided what to do with it. Full-time position. Benefits package including health insurance, actual, real, comprehensive health insurance with a deductible she would not lose sleep over. A 50% increase over her previous contractor rate. The letter cited her exceptional client ratings and a specific request from a long-standing client that the agency offer her the arrangement. She knew which long-standing client. She sat on the step stool and thought about what it meant to have someone in your corner. She had spent 11 months believing, with the pragmatic, wary clarity of someone who had been let down enough times to stop expecting otherwise, that corners were solo territory. That you put your back to the wall, and you faced whatever was coming, and you did not wait for someone to stand beside you, because the waiting itself was a kind of danger. She was revising that belief.
Slowly, carefully,
with the same methodical attention she brought to everything. She texted Ethan. The letter came. He responded in 40 seconds, which told her he'd been watching for it. And? I'm going to cry, and then I'm going to say yes. Good order of operations, he wrote. Then, the crying is allowed. She did cry. Briefly, quietly, in the bathroom with a fan on so Lily wouldn't hear, the way she cried all the important things, contained, private, fully felt. She cried for the year behind her and the specific exhaustion of it, and she cried for Lily in the hospital bay with the fluorescent light, and she cried because sometimes good things happen and the emotion attached to them is enormous and complicated, and relief looks a lot like grief when it finally comes. Then she washed her face and went back to her step stool and called the Premier Home Services office and said yes. In the months that followed, things changed the way the best things change, not all at once, not in a single dramatic gesture, but in accumulation, in small reliable increments, in the way that water smooths stone not through force but through faithful return. The new insurance covered Lily's follow-up appointments with Dr. Whitfield, who was brilliant and patient with 3-year-olds and cleared Lily to full normal activity by mid-April. Mrs. Patterson, who had been carrying an enormous amount of Maya's daily survival on her 74-year-old shoulders, was able to reduce Lily's days to 3 mornings a week while Maya explored proper childcare options. Maya opened a savings account. She added a $20 deposit to it every payday, which was not much, but it was the beginning of something. She replaced the cracked phone screen. This sounds small. It was not small. Ethan's involvement in these changes was both significant and careful. He helped without overriding. He opened doors without walking through them on her behalf. He had learned, and she had come to understand that he was genuinely capable of learning, which not everyone was, that the goal was not to take over her life, but to make her life operable on her own terms. The help that served her was the kind that made her more capable of helping herself, not less. They saw each other on Thursdays, still. And they talked on the phone on Tuesday evenings, which had begun as a practical thing, updates about the insurance situation, questions about paperwork, and had gradually, honestly, become something they both looked forward to for reasons that had nothing to do with logistics. He told her about his work, the parts that challenged him, and the parts that kept him going. She told him about nursing school, and about the question of whether to return, a question that had been dormant for a year and was beginning, cautiously, to stir again. He told her he thought she should. She said she wasn't sure she had the time, the money, the energy, the capacity. He said he thought she was underestimating herself in a way that had become habit and that habits can be changed. She thought about that for 2 days and then texted him. Maybe you're right. He wrote back, I usually am. Then, a minute later, that was arrogant. I meant, I hope I am. She smiled at her phone for a full minute. Lily adored him with the uncomplicated, wholehearted ferocity of a 3-year-old who had decided a thing was true and saw no reason to complicate it. She called him Mr. E because Ethan was too many syllables for someone who was still negotiating with the concept of 4. She brought him rocks every time they met, at the park, at the lakefront, once at a coffee shop where she presented him with a small gray pebble she had apparently been carrying in her coat pocket for an indeterminate period of time. He kept them. Maya discovered this by accident one Thursday when she was cleaning his bookshelf, a small glass bowl on the third shelf, containing 7 rocks of various sizes and completely unremarkable geology. She stood in front of that bowl for a long time. She was still standing there when Ethan came in from his morning run, saw her, and stopped. "You kept them," she said. "Of course I kept them. They're just rocks." "They're Lily's rocks," he said, as though this were a complete and sufficient explanation, because for him it was. She turned around, and whatever she had been about to say arranged itself into silence, because he was looking at her with that expression. The one that was not pity had never been pity, and it was more specific now than it had been in February, when she'd first arrived in this apartment not knowing what any of this would become. "Maya," he said. "I know," she said. "I haven't said anything." "I know what you haven't said." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that okay?" She looked at him. At this 33-year-old man who kept her daughter's rocks in a glass bowl on his bookshelf, who had called a pulmonologist and argued with an insurance company and increased her pay rate and stood beside her at the lake while Lily counted wrong numbers in the golden afternoon, and she thought about walls and doors and what it means to let light come through. "It's more than okay," she said. It was not the beginning of something simple. Love between two people whose lives are as different as theirs is never simple, and Maya was honest enough to know that, and careful enough to move through it with her eyes open. There were conversations ahead, important, necessary, sometimes uncomfortable, about what equality looks like when the resources are not equal, about what it means to need someone without losing yourself, about all the ways that the world would see them, and all the reasons those perceptions were other people's problems. But that was ahead. Right now, it was a Thursday morning in May, and the lake was visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the glass bowl on the third shelf held 7 rocks that mattered more than most of the expensive things in the room. That evening, Maya picked Lily up from Mrs. Patterson's house, and Lily ran to her at the door the way she always did, full tilt, no hesitation, arms wide, the way children run toward the things they trust completely. Maya caught her and held her and breathed her in, that warm, specific, irreplaceable smell. "Good day?" Maya asked. "Henry let me carry him," Lily said, which was apparently the metric. They walked home. It was warm enough to take the long way, past the little park with the swings that Lily loved, and they did that, stopped at the swings, Lily pumping her small legs with maximum effort and minimum efficiency, filling the air with the particular joy of motion. "Mommy," Lily said mid-swing. "Yeah, bug. Is Mr. E going to be around more?" Maya stood behind the swing, her hands ready to push. She looked at her daughter. This small, serious, luminous person who had come into the world 3 years ago and rearranged everything, who had sat in a hospital bay and absorbed the terrifying truth that the world did not automatically make room for them, who had asked a man she barely knew thank you for helping my mommy with the complete and weaponless honesty of the very young. "I think so," Maya said. Lily considered this with her customary philosophical gravity. "Good," she said. Then, "Higher, Mommy. Higher." Maya pushed the swing higher. Lily laughed, that specific, undefended, everything is good sound, and it went up into the May evening over the green park and the wide city, over everything that had been hard, and everything that was getting better, and everything that was still ahead. And Maya listened to it, and she let herself feel what she felt. Not all of it, not yet, because there was still the careful work of learning to trust a good thing when it finally came, but enough. Enough to know that something in her was opening. That something broken was, slowly, becoming something whole. That nobody had helped them. Until somebody did. And the somebody had kept the rocks.
The end.
The most important thing in the world is to be seen, not for what you have or what you can offer or what you look like when everything is fine, but for what you are carrying and how long you've been carrying it alone.